Good evening and welcome to Southbank Centre's In the Green Room. My name is Tok Stada, Head of Classical Music at Southbank Centre. So for this last edition of In the Green Room, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the incredibly talented brother and sister, Sheku and Isata Kanneh. I'm not going to read their full biogs because we don't have a lot of time and their biogs are very long, but just to give a bit of a taste, a few highlights of their trajectory so far. Sheku, winner of the 2016 BBC Young Musician competition, is already in huge demand from major orchestras and concert halls worldwide and became a household name worldwide in May 2018 after that magical performance at the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, watched by nearly 2 billion people globally. And then in that same year became the first artist to receive the New Brit Certified Breakthrough Award, following the sale of over 30,000 copies of his album in the UK and 100,000 worldwide. Sheku last year released his second album entitled Elgar with Sir Simon Rattle and the London Symphony Orchestra, making him the youngest classical instrumentalist and the first cellist in history to reach the UK top 10. And joining Sheku is Isata, his sister. Isata is the recipient of the 2021 Leonard Bernstein Award and a 2020 Opus Classic Award for Best Young Artist. Her debut album, Romance, the piano music of Clara Schumann, entered the UK classical charts at #1. Isata is about to release her follow-up album, Summertime, a journey through the varied piano repertoire of the 20th century America. Since graduating, Isata has similarly embarked on a successful and increasingly busy concert career as a solo artist with concerto appearances, solo recitals, and chamber concerts throughout the UK. And Sheku and Isata are just two of a very long line of 7 incredibly talented siblings. Sheku, Isata, welcome to In the Green Room.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Isata is joining us from her house in London, and Sheku is joining us from a football field. We were just talking at the beginning before we started the conversation. Such is the busy schedule of a musician that Sheku has football immediately after this. So I'm really pleased that you could find the time to join us. I want to start by talking about the return to live performance. I had the pleasure of traveling to London last Friday for a really, really special performance featuring Sheku performing with Chineke, Dvorak Cello Concerto, which was just amazing. And we're going to talk a bit about what that was like in a second. That performance, I think, was so special for a number of reasons. Obviously, Sheku, you have a very special relationship with Chineke, having performed in their debut concert at World Festival Hall in 2015 and then performing with them in the proms. But it was a really special concert because it was the first concert with a live audience at World Festival Hall since March 2020. Obviously there were streamed concerts, but it was the first one with a live audience. Sheku, how did that feel to, knowing you were part of such a major cultural moment, I guess, the first concert in so long with a live audience? How did that feel?
It felt for me, it felt incredibly exciting, and it had actually been about 3 years since I'd last played with Chineke Orchestra and with Kevin John Adise, who was conducting this concert last Friday. And so to be back with them was already really, really exciting, and so many of the musicians I've got to know even more over the years, and they've been incredibly supportive. And so to be a soloist with such an orchestra that really feels like a very big family was so special. And to walk out on that stage in the festival hall, knowing that it was the first concert to an audience in that hall since last March, which is in such a long time. And I think we all just enjoyed that moment and savored that moment. And it was definitely a very, very memorable occasion.
Mm-hmm. And it must have been so special for you, Isata, as well, to see Sheku performing. I mean, of course, you've seen each other perform many times. You performed together a lot. What was it like for you as an audience member? Being in that very first live concert after so long at World Festival Hall.
Yeah, I mean, this definitely felt like a big moment, and I haven't watched Sheku play a concerto since before the first lockdown. I can't even remember how long ago since I went to a concerto concert of any kind, but definitely at least a year and a half. So it was a really special moment, and also because myself and various family members and both of Sheku's teachers, his current teacher and his old teacher and friends, we were all sat within quite a close vicinity of each other. And due to social distancing, there weren't many other people. So you really had a very direct eye line to the stage, and you could also see everyone you knew around you very close. So it really felt like a very intimate, shared and special experience.
That's so nice to hear. It's almost a silver lining, I guess, of the time that we're living through. Although, obviously, live performances are configured at the moment with socially distanced audiences. That actually, the silver lining is that you do get that kind of direct kind of eye line with the performer. I mean, I echo that. I know definitely where I was sat. I could see Sheku really clearly and could feel the intensity in which you were playing. Really clearly. So even though we're living through this kind of really strange time, I guess that is one silver lining. And Isatas, for you, you've got a really big year coming up as well. So in December, you'll be performing at Southbank Centre in Queen Elizabeth Hall. So looking forward to welcoming you for that. You're continuing as a young artist in residence at Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, and you're about to embark on a European tour, which I have to say, I mean, I'm really, it's particularly pleasing for me that you're about to embark on this tour, because obviously it was when I was back in Birmingham at Symphony Hall there, it was Town Hall Symphony Hall that nominated you for the ECHO European Concert Hall Organisation Rising Stars scheme. What does that feel like? The fact that you have all of these things going on and you're about to embark on this huge European tour. I think it's about 20 concert halls or something that you tour around. I mean, that must feel like such a big a breakthrough moment, if you will.
Yeah, it feels incredible, and to have the opportunity to play in so many different cities and to have all these places already booked in so far in advance feels like such a privilege, especially after the last year of not knowing what's going to happen and having so many gaps in the diary. To suddenly have such a full couple of years ahead of me feels really special. And also I feel very excited and very ready for it to all start, and I've had a year to prepare, so it's really exciting. And many of the places I'm performing, many of the cities I've never been to before for any reason, and many of the halls I'm performing in I've only been to in order to watch other people play, so it feels very exciting to be playing there myself.
That's so wonderful. And one of the kind of features, I guess, of the ECHO Rising Star scheme is that every artist has the opportunity to commission a new work. And you've chosen Eleanor Alberger, right? What was it that drew you to Eleanor? What was it about her music that attracted you to commissioning her to write a new piece?
Well, I instantly loved her music because as soon as I heard her pieces, I instantly felt something, and I instantly felt drawn to them, and I had a very clear emotional response to the music. And even though it was an unfamiliar style or new harmonies, I had an instant response to it. And so I kind of just felt this is music that I want to play. And then I met her on Zoom, and she's such a lovely, kind, wonderful woman. And I just really wanted to work with her. And I think it was also meant to be, because I found out afterwards that she was very good friends with my previous teacher, Patsy, who's very excited that I chose her to work with. And I think it was a really good choice. So I'm excited to start working on the piece.
So how's that going? Has she started writing yet? How will talk to us about that kind of creative process? Because I think it's very interesting, when you're having a piece written, especially for you, the opportunity to kind of, engage in that backwards and forwards with the composer must be really special. How's that process going? Has it started yet?
Yeah, well, excitingly, actually, the piece arrived today, so I haven't had a chance to open it yet. But it's very exciting to know that she's finished it. And in terms of the process, I mean, we had a Zoom call and we talked about, well, we just sort of got to know each other and chatted. I mean, it wasn't kind of, oh, I want you to write something like this, and she asked me what kind of things I like, but essentially, I just trusted her to write something that she enjoyed and that she thought I would enjoy. And now she's finished it, so I'll have a look at it, and then I'm sure we'll be in touch if I have any questions, or she'll want to know how it's going, and perhaps I'll play to her. That will be very exciting. But yeah, that's where we are currently in the process.
Wonderful. So, hearing you talk about commissioning Elna for this piece, and you reference the kind of emotional connection to her music, and Sheku, I know for you, well, as is the case for any artist, there are those particular pieces that really resonate with you and you have an emotional connection to, and hearing Isatas talk about that reminded me of your second album, and the Elgar, which is obviously the kind of center piece of that album. I know it's a piece that's very kind of close to your heart. What is it about that work for you that kind of speaks to you so much? Because I know you've talked before about Jacqueline du Pré being such an idol of yours. So what about that piece that resonates with you?
It's probably the piece of music that I've listened to the most of anything, and I have kind of consistently been listening to it a lot since I was very, very young. And it's one of the pieces, and particularly the Jacqueline du Pré recording, that has always inspired me to want to be a cellist and to love the instrument. And I just love how personal the piece feels. It was obviously very, very personal to the composer. And if you look at the score, it's incredibly detailed. And there's so many wonderful things in the harmony and the shape of the melody and things like that. And that, I think, generates such a personal interpretation from each cellist, I feel, who plays it. And there is so much you can discover in the piece of music. And that's why it's so wonderful. And I think it's one of those pieces that, of anything, can make me cry every single time I listen to it, and I would never be tired of it and never be tired of playing it or listening to it. And it's just magical.
I mean, that's so wonderful to hear. When you were preparing for the recording, or even I guess when you're preparing for any performance of that piece, is it really difficult to kind of create your own interpretation? You talked about a personal interpretation, but given that you, as you said, you listened to Jacqueline du Pré's recording for so long when you were growing up, is it really hard then to kind of put your own stamp on the piece because you have her sound in your head?
Not really, because I always take the view that, of course, you take inspiration from other artists, and I've taken a lot of inspiration from Jacqueline du Pré's playing. But I think what's more important is the things that I love in her playing, to try and then understand why I love those things and the intentions behind some of the ideas she has, and to look at the score and to question the intentions behind the notes that Elgar has chosen and the harmonies, and that, I find, for me, develops a very vivid and because I think often the danger is having quite a vague just emotional response to it. But I think the more vivid and the more layers of understanding you have, then the more convincing the interpretation is, and the more personal it becomes. And so, of course, you have to keep that initial spark and the reason that you love the piece. But for me, with the Elgar Concerto, it took a lot of studying the piece and understanding it, a lot of performing it as well, and it changed as I performed it. And I was lucky to work on it with some great teachers, and they had some great ideas as well, and to record it with Sir Simon Rattle as well. He also came with an amazing perspective on the piece and the time period in which it was written. And so I guess, I mean, I'm very proud of this recording, but I know that in 5 years and in 10 years and in 15 years, I'll be playing it hopefully very, very differently. And as I develop as a person and as my relationship with the piece also changes, I think that's an exciting thing, and it will be continually evolving, hopefully.
It's part of the beauty of, living with a piece for so long that, your relationship with it evolves over time. And Isata, as I mentioned at the beginning, you have a new album. It's not out yet. I think it's next month, right?
Yes, the 9th of July.
Tell us about that. So this is summertime.
Yes, yeah. And so it started off it started with the Barber Sonata, actually, which is the central piece of the album, I would say. And this is a piece that I've loved for many years. I love Barber as a composer, and I always had such a strong urge to learn this piece. And so then I started having conversations about how the album might look, and thought that it would be a wonderful idea to have a theme of American music. And I think that American music is such a varied topic and such a varied style. And so, for example, the Barber Sonata, Barber was an American composer, but if I were to think of American music, I wouldn't specifically think of a sound world like the Barber Sonata. I'd think more of, for example, Gershwin or this kind of thing. So the album kind of has a wide range of music, from pieces like Gershwin, the preludes and well-known American song transcriptions, all the way to music like the Barber Sonata, and also includes some Samuel Coleridge-Taylor as well, his arrangements of the American Negro spirituals. And so I just wanted to represent so many different aspects of this style of music, and also have pieces that could build a narrative around the Barber Sonata and complement it and contrast it. So yeah, it's very exciting for me. And this is not music that I've been playing loads of for many years. So it's also been a really enjoyable discovery for me as well.
And is, when you're performing live, is that what you try to do as well? Do you try to kind of create some, a through line, a narrative in what you're playing? I know for some artists that's really important. For others, it's less about that, and it's more just about, pieces that have a real kind of deep and meaningful emotional connection for them. What's your approach?
Well, what Sheku said is exactly right. I mean, after a while, it's not enough to have just a kind of vague emotional response to the music, the one you have initially. I think once you yourself start working on the piece, so once you've listened to it and decided you want to play it, then I think you have to take on a certain responsibility, and you want the audience to have the emotional response that you had. But in order to give that to them, you have to be really, really clear on what you're expressing, and you have to have a really clear narrative and have gone into loads and loads of detail in order for that message to get across, and in order for the audience to react how you want them to react. So I think that's how I see the journey between when you first listen to the piece to when you're performing it to other people.
So I've never heard it quite described that way. I think that sums up the kind of creative process for an artist really, really beautifully, actually. So you're both incredibly busy. You're touring, all the time. Definitely, certainly pre-pandemic. Very few artists can say that, they have successful international touring careers. I think even few can say that they've performed at a royal wedding. What was that like, Sheku? Because that was I think definitely for people that follow classical music, obviously, after 2016 and the BBC Young Musician competition, you were obviously very much on people's radar. But in terms of, the wider society outside of classical music, I think it's fair to say that moment in 2018 with that performance at the Royal Wedding was really the point that, you came to kind of much wider attention. What was that like, that whole experience?
It was very, I suppose the performance itself is in a setting that's very different to what I'm used to, and the occasion was, of course, very had a lot of attention and things like this. But I remember, well, I guess in the moment of performing, I just enjoyed the space and the opportunity to be playing such beautiful music, and so I think it was just a great opportunity to perform for so many people watching from around the world, and yeah, I guess for a lot of people it was the first time seeing me play, and so I guess it was important in introducing myself to a lot of people around the world, and so I'm grateful for that opportunity. But yeah, it was of course very, very different to the kind of performances and concerts that I most enjoy doing in concert halls and things like this. But it's nice to have some variety and do something a bit different.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I do have to say that whole idea of, you know, through media introducing millions, if not billions, of people to classical music is something that the two of you and your siblings have done incredibly well during lockdown. So I think it was twice weekly you'd have these like live streams from your family home in Nottingham. And Isatas, you did I think one of the highlights was you did the Beethoven third piano concerto, kind of accompanied by your brothers and sisters, which must have felt so special. And like, you know, over 100 million views, right? For classical music, when so often classical music gets a really kind of bad reputation for, you know, not being, you know, accessible. But there you were, you know, playing a piece of Beethoven, over 100 million views. And not only that, you know, there was the BBC documentary about, you know, all of you in the same house playing this wonderful music. And it looked so amazing being immersed by all of this music. What's it like, you know, being one of 7 siblings, Isata, who are all incredibly talented musicians? I mean, that must feel amazing being surrounded by all of that music. But at the same time, you know, so much going on. What's that like?
Yeah, definitely. And I think what it's like to be one of 7 siblings is something that's also evolved as time goes on, as we're in different stages of life. So for example, when we were all growing up together, definitely there was lots of noise, lots of music. You had to get used to practicing with the sound of a piano or a cello or something else. I mean, our walls were not soundproof, they were very thin, so you just got used to practicing with external noise. And we'd do family concerts and give each other advice, and it was wonderful. It was an inspiring atmosphere because it's easy to be motivated when everyone's doing the same thing. And there was also a wonderful sense of community because we all unequivocally understand what the other person is going through because we're pursuing similar things. I would say now that sense of community is still there. Most of us live in London now, and so we're not all together as often in the same house, but I think there's always that feeling that there's a network of support out there, and I know that I can always rely on my siblings, and both musically and as people. So I think that's a really comforting feeling, especially as a musician. Your life is so fragmented if you're traveling a lot, or, you know, people live in different places. So I think having that sense, knowing that that comfort and that support system is out there, is a really wonderful thing. And the older I get, the more grateful I feel for it.
Yeah, it must be so great having that support network. I mean, I remember certainly when I went to music college X number of years ago, obviously I wasn't from a family of classical musicians, so that, you know, that whole kind of environment where you're surrounded by musicians and you're trying to practice your scales, and there's somebody in the room next door to you, you know, hammering out, you know, whatever study or whatever it is, can be like really overwhelming. But I guess, you know, coming from such a musical family must have set you up really well for that kind of environment. What was it like for you, Sheku, as being the first, I guess, to go to music college?
No, I'm not. I'm the third.
The third?
Yeah, so Isatas the eldest, and then we have an older brother. I have an older brother in between Esther and I in age. So I was actually the third. So by the time I went to the academy, I kind of knew what to expect, and they told me of their experiences, and so I felt that I kind of knew the place, and I always had older siblings to tell me what to give me advice on what to avoid and what to do, etc., and things like that. So I think being the third is a good position because you have advice from older siblings. I still also have younger siblings who, particularly my youngest sister who's playing the cello, I'm able to help with her practice and things like this. And so I think it's nice to be able to receive advice and also give advice as well. And that's that's lovely. And I'm very grateful to have grown up in a house where everyone was passionate about music. That's the best environment.
So despite everything that you've both got going on, Sheku, you still find time to be an ambassador for, music education charities, Music Masters, Future Talent. Tell us a bit about the work that you're doing with those charities.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to be able to work with Music Masters, which I think does such amazing work working with children who maybe otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to learn an instrument, and they get the whole primary school learning the violin and the cello and the piano, and it's so wonderful when I go into those schools to see the enthusiasm of these young children. When I play to them, to see the immediate and sort of very, very natural emotional response they have to hearing an instrument, and to see also the confidence I think that it gives these children if they feel that they have something that they can really dedicate themselves in and believe in and work with other children on and feel like they're being listened to. I think that's one of the wonderful things about giving a child an instrument. You give them a voice, and that's why I'm so passionate about working with charities. And similarly, Future Talent. It's just wonderful. I love working with young people and sharing the love of music that I have with them, and hopefully lighting a spark which will eventually turn into a new generation of lots of very, very exciting musicians. And I think the enthusiasm is such a wonderful thing to see. So yeah, it's great.
And Isatas, what about for you? I mean, I know as part of the Echo tour, you'll be doing some kind of education projects and education work in each of the cities that you're touring to. Have you started to think about, the kinds of projects that you might work on when you're there?
Yeah, I think, as Sheku said, giving children a voice is so important. And I think I'd love to be able to listen to young children who already play an instrument, but perhaps need more encouragement, or perhaps, I think also for children to see, to have a clear idea of what could be possible. And if, for example, I think if you're a child and you're playing an instrument, I think it's important to be made aware that being a professional musician is something that's an option and that's achievable, but also that music is something which you can enjoy and love even if you don't want to be a professional musician. And so I think I'd like to do projects that encourage and inspire children to love music more, both through playing to them and through listening to them play and hopefully giving advice. And I just think this kind of exposure is the best way to feed these children and give them a I'm sure they already have a love of music, but give them a confidence in that love and a confidence in what they want to do with it.
It's really inspiring to hear. It's really wonderful. This concludes Southbank Centre's In the Green Room series. Thank you again for your support over the last year. To find out more and watch other talks that have happened in the series, go to Southbank Centre's website or YouTube channel. It was such a pleasure to speak to both of you. So thank you so much. It's been really great to see you again.